We're here in San Francisco, and Jeff Blankfort, who is a longtime activist, has a banner out here for the people on the highway to see against war for Israel and against support for the genocide in Gaza and the West Bank.
My name is Jeff Blankfort, and I have been fighting for justice in Palestine for over 50 years.
Talk about this recent Democratic Party convention.
It was exactly what I expected, a love and totally divorced from reality. We have a foreign policy, even excluding the Middle East, in which the Biden administration has been running non-stop military exercises with other countries, threatening wars all over the world. And when the Democratic Party doesn't want to talk about our foreign policy unless it's supporting Israel or supporting Ukraine, but the reality is Israel is what determines what their foreign policy is. And so here, with people around the country, protesting around the world, protesting it, what the United Nations has called genocide in Palestine and Gaza, and President Biden, called Genocide Joe, has continued to send weapons there, and yet we have Kamala Harris.
Who is Kamala Harris?
Kamala Harris was a Bay Area politician who ran for Senate and wanted to be the only black woman in the U.S. Senate, and she won. But 3 months after she took office, she was at an AIPAC conference on April 17, 2017. You could still see it on YouTube, in which she actually gave a love song in a speech to the AIPAC delegation from California. I played it on my radio program. It was so obscene, but you watch it, it's still there on YouTube. And then, when she was running for president, before Biden entered the race, Israel was doing something in Gaza, so all the Democratic candidates decided not to attend the AIPAC convention, including Kamala. But what did she do? She went to her office, opened her office for the California delegation, took photo ops, which went to Jewish voters, and the rest of the public didn't know how devoted she is to Israel. And when she pulled out of the race, even when she was eligible for another debate, I predicted on my Facebook page that was part of a deal. She will be Biden's vice president, because they were the only two candidates running who had repeatedly demonstrated their affection for Israel. The other ones supported Israel, but not to the extent that Biden and Harris did. And when Biden says, well, I picked Kamala Harris, he didn't even know her. He picked Kamala Harris. He didn't pick Kamala Harris. The donors of the Democratic Party were predominantly wealthy Jewish, liberal, socially liberal Jews. They picked Biden, and they picked Kamala Harris, and they had their faithful retainer, Jim Clyburn, tell the voters of South Carolina that, but we know Biden, he knows us. He gave the eulogy for Strom Thurmond at Thurmond's request, one of the biggest segregations in the South, and was proud that he co-authored with Strom Thurmond the most horrible crime bill that put tens of thousands of young black and Latino American men in prison, and no one even calls them on it. So Democratic convention was just exactly what I saw, an obscenity, an insult to the reality.
The role of Zionism, I mean, both the Democratic and Republican parties call themselves Zionist parties. They support Zionism. What does that mean to the American people, working people?
They don't know about it. They really don't hear that part. For example, there's something called the Democratic Majority for Israel. And yesterday, they bragged to their loyal mailing list and funders that they were responsible for keeping any criticism of Israel out of the Democratic platform, and keeping any pro-Palestinian speaker from speaking there. They took credit for it. Mark Mellman is the guy's name. Democratic Majority for Israel. And they essentially determine the foreign policy of the Democratic Party in the Middle East.
Now, you have been sued by the ADL. I was sued as well. Why did they sue us? Why did the Zionist entity, the ADL, which is work with the B'nai B'rith work with the Nazis during the Second World War.
What they did was one of the ADL Israel's main concern is with the American labor movement, and also with the threat of the anti-apartheid movement toward Israel. So you and I were both involved in anti-apartheid work as well, and what the ADL chief spy said, his chief spy was a guy named Roy Bullock. He came to the first meeting we organized in the Labor Committee in the Middle East, and you had already met him because he was in an anti-apartheid organization for prisoner Moses Mayakiso, a South African worker. And I got a message, an anonymous message, that Roy Bullock was an ADL agent for 25 years, and you and I interviewed him, and his answers didn't match up. He wasn't ready for the interview. It turned out I had learned he had been going to Palestinian meetings around the country, just happened to be there, and he's an art dealer, so he told me it was a coincidence that he was in those cities buying art when the Palestinians were having a meeting. And he gave me the names and addresses and phone numbers of 2 art galleries in San Francisco. So I went and talked to activists here. I remember the Socialist Action. I went to them, and they were furious that I would even call Bullock an agent. And in 1988, just after I spoke to them, there was the last big march on Market Street, and we wanted to get the Intifada on that march, but the Socialist Action, Dick Becker, all those people were against it because labor wouldn't like it, but their idea of labor. And what did I see with Carl Fenimore of Socialist Action talking from the back of a flatbed pickup on Market Street? Who's holding the microphone but Roy Bullock? After we had told them he volunteered and they allowed him to work in the office, we started a petition on something called the Emergency Committee for Palestinian Rights, and we got hundreds of people signing a petition to put Palestinian issue on the march demands. And so I sent, every time we got a filled petition, I sent them registered mail to the mobilization office where Bullock put all the names into the ADL file. You can't make this stuff up. I mean...
And Jeff Mackler was defending him. Dick Becker was defending him.
Defending him. The people who are the parties claiming to be revolutionary or actually have been in bed with the Democrats and with the reactionary labor movement for years.
Today, I mean, the unions have said that they don't want to take a stand against Zionism. Some are for ceasefire, but it seems that the AFL-CIO is still actually involved in supporting Zionism and working with the National Endowment for Democracy all over the world with Israel and the History Group.
Well, I'll tell you, you were the one who wanted to start the Labor Committee, and I was against the committee. And then I read an article in a Jewish woman's magazine, Hadassah Courier, which began with a paragraph, I remember verbatim, that in the lobby of the AFL-CIO in Washington is a bust of Golda Meir, who was an Israeli prime minister, and the writer said that should be, it was really appropriate because no movement has done more to support Israel besides the Jewish community than the AFL-CIO, which has bought millions of dollars of State of Israel bonds. And the article talked about who had bought the bonds, and the writer of that article, people may have heard, Wolf Blitzer, who went on to work for AIPAC and now with CNN. And after I read that article, I said, Steve, let's start the Labor Committee.
And that bulletin that went all over the world, and a lot of people found out about the role of the AFL-CIO, the Histadrut, and the Democratic Party.
And we also exposed those in the Palestinian movement who were collaborating with Israel. I mean, it was, unfortunately, I still haven't found someone to put it up online, because that was before, I mean, what do you call it, the Library of Congress subscribed to it. It was really a unique magazine. There was nothing like it before and nothing like it since, because we started it because the Palestinian Support Committee, not Palestinian, in San Francisco would not take a position critical of AFL-CIO or the Histadrut, the Israeli Labor Federation, which we then found out had an office, the SEIU Local 2, down on Golden Gate, San Francisco. And our first action, when Willie Brown was going to speak to the Labor Council at the annual Histadrut luncheon with the Labor Council. Unbelievable, these lunches are taking place without protest. And so we wrote a letter, we signed a letter to Willie Brown saying don't go and speak to these supporters of South Africa, because actually we had a flyer made because the Jerusalem Post had a big article on anti-apartheid activists in Israel attacking the Histadrut for its collaboration with apartheid South Africa. So we sent that to Willie Brown and said, don't go. We got no response. And then I went on KPU here, KPFA, talking about this issue. And then 2 weeks later, Willie Brown sends a response that says, thank you, but I think it's better to go and talk to them and tell them about what I think about it than not. So we had these flyers we put out at the federal building, and there were a number of events taking place with a number of black trade unionists. And the question on the flyer said, what is Willie Brown doing speaking to the allies of apartheid South Africa? The guy at the Brown's office said, we got 1 million phone calls. And Sean George, a black supervisor in Oakland, in a long article in the Oakland Tribune, criticized Willie Brown for breaking the anti-apartheid picket line, which he did. He and Walter Johnson went into the Fairmont Hotel through the back door. That was the last event the Histadrut had in San Francisco. They closed their office and left. But the movement had done nothing.
Well, you know, it's interesting because one of the last times you were in the Bay Area, you spoke at the Bay Area Labor for Palestine conference and had a whole report on Palestine and the Histadrut. And myself and another trade union activist, Lisa Milos, were thrown off that committee without a vote, without a discussion, because we said that they should raise the issue of the Histadrut in these demonstrations around Palestine. And we got removed undemocratically from that committee. So apparently the Zionists still have their grip on people who say that they're for Palestine and the labor movement.
They have their grips on every organization that has been formed to fight for justice for Palestine. In 1963, there was a hearing held by Senator Fulbright on Jewish penetration, Israeli penetration of American politics. On the basis of that information, President Kennedy demanded that the American Zionist Council, which was AIPAC's name at the time, register as a foreign agent, but they were able to, their lawyers, to block it long enough until Kennedy was assassinated and Lyndon Johnson went into their pocket. And so most people don't even talk about this hearing, but they were really important. Also, they don't even know that Kennedy supported the right of return of Palestinians. This is simply a secret. Noam Chomsky, who talks about the Israel lobby being a paper tiger, never mentions any of this. But it's recorded history. Adlai Stevenson, in a conversation with Ben Gurion, Stevenson was the UN ambassador, told Ben Gurion, you're going to have to take back the refugees. Well, that was a red line that Israel couldn't allow to be crossed. And so after the hearings, which no one knows about, the American Zionist Council became AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee.
Didn't the B'nai B'rith during the Second World War say that there should not be protests in the United States to allow Americans, before the Second World War, allow Jews to come here, and dissuaded it, and also that the Zionists actually invited Eichmann to Palestine at that time to get him to support the idea of a Zionist state?
No, actually, what happened is that the mainstream Zionist movement, which B'nai B'rith ADL is part of, was sabotage all the efforts to inform the American public of what was going on with Germany and the Jews, because their agenda was to build a Jewish state. And if Jewish lives had to be sacrificed for that, there's a book that's just come out talking about that, is that the evidence is not pie in the sky, it's actually there. There was a book written by Ben Hecht, who was a very famous Jewish playwright, called Perfidy, about the betrayal of the mainstream Zionists of the Jews and collaborating with Eichmann. Hannah Arendt also wrote a book about that, and Holocaust studies manuals for Holocaust studies don't conclude any of the stuff. It's like propaganda. It's not that millions of Jews weren't killed. It's that the Zionists collaborated with Eichmann from the beginning, because of higher death tolls, more Jews who would die, the better chance they would have to get a Jewish state. And to tell you the truth, if you ask the majority of the people of Israel today, was it worth it? At least before October 7th, they'd probably say it was worth it.
And the idea of a Zionist working with fascism, with Nazis, is their ideology the same?
Actually, the Germans got it from the Zionists, because both Eichmann, who claimed to be a Zionist in his trial, and Hitler read the Jewish state, Der Judenstaat, the book by Theodor Herzl, which you don't find anywhere. Hello there, Doug. Which you don't find anywhere, because it's so racist. But they sought Jewish supremacy, and they adopted that for Aryan supremacy. But the Aryan supremacy was just a short-lived operation. Zionism goes on and on. It's an amazing story. Most American Jews not only don't know it, they don't want to know it. Today we are seeing genocide taking place in Gaza, a continuing genocide that actually began in 1948, even before that, and supported completely by both American parties, which seem to owe their honor, their fealty to a foreign country, and are complicit with the genocide going on. Today I'm here on 23rd Street in San Francisco with a banner that was first made by a friend of mine in 1991 from a sale from a Chinese junk. And we put it, this was in 91, before the first U.S. war in the Gulf, and we had it here across the street all day long back then, with tremendous support from the people driving by. Today, people who walked by here have liked what they've seen, or were totally oblivious. And someone from the city came to check, because there was a complaint that we were hanging the sign on the fence. But when he saw we weren't, smiled, gave a thumbs up, and walked away.
And here in San Francisco, you've got Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. You had Feinstein. You have now Padilla. The Democrats are fully supporting the continued military funding of Israel. But also the unions at the AFL-CIO, they spoke at the convention. The unions was like a love fest. There was no mention of the genocide that's going on. It seems genocide is a forbidden, verboten word.
Actually, the word did not exist before World War II. All the massacres of people into Congo, there was no word to describe it until the Jews were murdered by the Nazis. But the real thing is, our trade labor unions are totally in contradiction with workers all over the world who've been supporting his struggle in Palestine for years. And we don't see that here. As long as I've been involved, and we had our labor committee in the Middle East, which we started in order to educate American workers about the struggle.
And there's a lot of opposition to raising the issue of Zionism, and the fact that the AFL-CIO leadership are pro-Zionist. Besides supporting U.S. imperialism, they're supporting military budgets.
Well, this is going back to Lane Kirkland, who bragged that he had been to more State of Israel bond dinners, than any person alive. And he did this in Israel while a delegation of trade unionists from all over the world were in the West Bank, but no American trade unionist was with them. This is something most American workers don't know, but we made efforts back in the 90s. If American workers really knew the issues, they would support the Palestinian struggle, but their leaders lie to them. Even when you try to organize a picket of Nancy Pelosi, and what did we have? The so-called left leaders in San Francisco, Jeff Mackler, Dick Becker, Carl Eisinger, who would later speak when there was a Zim boycott. They were the ones who tried to stop the picket of a Nancy Pelosi $100 breakfast paid for by the Labor Council. She came to the Labor Council. I remember I was there pushing NAFTA. And I remember John Moran from the Transport Workers Union standing up and saying, that's bull bleep, Nancy, you know it, that's bull bleep. The Democrats supported NAFTA, the labor union supported NAFTA. It's something that really has to be dealt with. People have to take their blinkers off and see what's the situation.
And Liz Schuler, the president of the AFL-CIO, she was on the board of the National Endowment For Democracy, which took over from the directly CIA-funded operation, AIFLD. It seems like actually the AFL-CIO leadership, Liz Schuler and Trumpka previously, actually support U.S. imperialist intervention through a National Endowment For Democracy. Is that true?
Well, George Bush Sr., speaking in 1989 to the AFL-CIO, addressed them by accident or as a joke because the AFL-CIA, and again everybody laughed. Inside joke. But the fact is, the AFL-CIO spent more time working for the CIA and U.S. government, overthrowing governments around the world, than they have working for American workers here.
And you have tried to raise this your decades for your lifetime, but there are people who say that they support the Palestinians, but they don't want to fight the union bureaucracy around that issue. What does that mean?
It means they're hypocrites. They're hypocrites if they're not ready to do that and say stop all aid to Israel, not suspend aid or put conditions on it. There's no reason that we should be giving them any kind of weapons of war, because mostly they have been using against civilians, Palestinian civilians. We see violations of American law, but American law does not apply to Israel, clearly.
And you have people like Bill Fletcher, who says that he wants to support the struggle of Palestinians. What's Bill Fletcher's role? Because he presents himself as also supporting the U.S. military arming of Ukraine.
You're talking about junior or senior? No difference. Like what they say, the apple didn't fall far from the tree, but it was already rotten before it fell.
And I mean, there's a growing anger in this country about military aid to Israel, about the fact that the United States is openly supporting genocide. One of the issues is there's no political alternative. Working people don't have their own political party. How do you see that? Because there's a political crisis. You have the rise of fascism, who openly say that they want a fascist state.
It's so frustrating to see. For years our political system is a sham, and if the Trump period has shown nothing else, it's shown that our whole system is totally undemocratic and was never intended to be democratic. We don't even elect our own president. The Electoral College was to keep the poor and those who now owning property from determining who will be the president, and that has not changed. Doesn't matter what party. Over the centuries, we have 2 centuries. It's the same. People say, "Oh, we need to change the electoral college." Nobody makes an effort to do that.
And as far as stopping the genocide, if the workers in this country, railroad workers, airline workers had a general strike, would that stop the genocide?
It would certainly make a dent in it. It would certainly scare some people, but right now they don't have to worry about, because you have Democratic Party convention, a love fest where no Palestinian were represented. You had a Palestinian delegate from Georgia, and she made a very mild speech. She was going to make a mild speech. She showed it to the Democrats, including Kamala Harris, But even then, to allow a Palestinian American to have the same rights as an Israeli parent, American parents of of their boy who was in Israel. What was he doing in Israel? They have a program called Birthright Israel, in which they send American Jews over on free trips to Israel, and a lot of the young men who go on that trip end up going over to Israel to fight and kill Palestinians.
So they're American citizens who are, and that's working for the IDF.
They join the IDF, and then they become what they call lone soldiers. And so they raise money here in the United States. The biggest fundraising charity, tax exempt, in the United States is something called the Friends of Israel Defense Forces. Their big banquets, the last one before COVID, raised $60 million. Not a word in the U.S. media other than Hollywood Variety. And that $60 million, $16 million came from Larry Ellison, the owner of Oracle, the San Francisco ballpark, so much, but there's not a word of that because they have the media in their pockets too.